The St. Ubong Mountain stands high above a great bay in the southwest corner of Sarawak, and at its foot there's one of the largest villages in all this part of Borneo. The people who live in this village are Malays, the Mohammedan people who live on all the Borneo coasts, and nearly all their lives are concerned with fishing and moving about the waters of the sea, the delta, the river, and the swamps. They're quite different in their way of life and of thinking from the inland Dayak peoples. They're essentially people of the great waters, not people of the mountains, the jungle, or rice. They're not great artists or hunters. They're not crazy about dancing or marvelous wood carvers, but they're a quiet, peace-loving people who rank with anyone in the world as master fishermen. From the first streak of daylight over the delta, people start going out fishing. Some, like Ali and his son, go out into the estuary after the big, moving shoals of fish using a throw net. This third cast is taken in slow motion, of course. The weights attached to the edge of the net make it sink rapidly so that it catches all the fish underneath it. The first sound that you hear in the village at dawn is the cry of little girls calling, "Boy, boy," as they advertise the rice cakes and banana and coconut pasties which they sell to the fishermen who are in too much of a hurry to have an ordinary rice breakfast. The only off-the-floor furniture in an ordinary St. Ubong Malay house are the pillows, and the first thing in the morning, the housewife puts the pillows out in the sun. Some men are preparing more elaborate methods of fishing, needing big nets and teams of fishermen working together. Mile, who does the great summer ceremony for turtle fertility out on the islands and leads all the other big fishing magics in the Great St. Ubong Bay, is rowing up to look at his special sort of fish trap. And one of his own offerings flutters from one of the posts. This sort of trap, which he makes every year, is built on the edge of the river in the mudbanks. The fish are caught in a bamboo cage as the tide falls, leaving them stranded inside it. Sometimes there are only a few fish. Sometimes there may be 100 or 200 pounds if the water happens to be running nicely, and sometimes he even catches dolphins and porpoises. "200 yards downstream from Miles' quite modest bamboo trap is one of the great fishing platforms. These are only worked in the summer because in the winter flood the big logs and trees drifting downriver are liable to smash them up. Even in summer, they require constant attention. The uprights are made of a kind of hard palm that grows in the swamp called nibong, but in the river, the barnacles get into it and destroy it within a year. The principle of this trap is that the net is sunk just under the surface of the water and is fished on the falling tide, being dipped at intervals to pick up the small fish and prawns. The catch swims down into the narrower cod end of the net, and the whole thing's about 30 yards long and 20 broad. The biggest part of the catch is usually shrimps and prawns, and sometimes they're so numerous that the people can tell when there are prawns about by merely putting their toes in the river and feeling them tickle. In one lucky season, one of these fish gears may make a fisherman as much as £500, which is a lot of money for these parts, but they're terribly expensive to keep up. For the most part, Malays prefer to fish individually or in small groups by simpler and less costly methods. As the tide falls, everything becomes mud and new sorts of fishing begin. Out of the mud grows a wonderfully rich swamp vegetation covered at high tide. And into the labyrinth of creeks which honeycomb this swamp go other sorts of fishermen, especially those seeking crabs. The crabbers know every nook and corner of the swamp waterways. But crabbing is considered to be one of the lower class of fishing business in St. Toubong, partly because it's the simplest of all, and partly because it involves a lot of mucking about in the mud. A bit of coconut as bait, or a bit of rotten octopus, if you like. And the shell of a king crab makes an excellent bailer. The whole swamp is riddled with mosquitoes, and this is another reason why crabbing is an unpopular occupation. First time he has no luck. Second time, a crab. They're delicious red too, these Borneo crabs, and quite vicious. They've got to be handcuffed. But the crabs are only a part of an enormously rich marine life in St. Toubong Bay. There are at least 200 kinds of food fishes known and named by the Malays. As the sun comes up and the day gets warmer, the fresh water from the mountainside warms up, and now the women start bathing and washing. These women are very, very clean, and they have an almost obsessional idea about doing laundry. They beat all the clothing on the rocks to get it clean, and if there's money to spare, they use washing soap as well. The sarong is the ordinary garment which they sew themselves, and they wear it with a very simple, pretty coat. Often these clothes will be washed as much as 4 or 5 times a week because they haven't many of them. There's no difficulty about toys, fishes for the girls, boats for the boys. There are, in fact, rather few toys, and most of children's play has to do with imitating adults. At any time of the day or night, you'll always find some people who haven't gone fishing because they're working on their nets or some other sort of fishing gear. Mohammed's preparing one of the most peculiar of all the many St. Toubon fishing devices called a gorit. A gorit's a long line of hooks, but these hooks don't have any bait. Instead of baiting the hook, it's made razor sharp, and the fish is caught by impaling and entangling itself. The rows and rows of these hooks are let out on lines about 100 yards long, and the hooks finish up close to the bottom, lying a few inches apart. If a fish comes along, and that usually means a ray or a shark, which are bottom feeders, it may strike against one of these hooks. Now that immediately frightens it. It tries to swerve and move off, and as it does so, the hooks automatically catch in other parts of its body until it's completely snarled up in the whole gear. It's easy to get a whole line fouled up because in the boat he's probably got as much as half a mile of this gear. The bamboo float marks the position of the lines. And after quite a short while, he starts pulling up the line, working along it very carefully. There's no question of putting on fresh bait in this method of fishing. Stingray are the usual catch, and they're dangerous. The sting of these rays lies in the end of the tail where there are two cruel barbs, and if a man gets struck by one of these, he may be in agony for 3 or 4 days. So the fishermen have to be really careful. That tail can flash round and strike in an instant. In the big long-tailed ones, the tail is sometimes cut off as a precaution in advance. As the tide turns again, another sort of fishing begins. This is a seine net fishing called pukat, and it's done usually by teams of 5 people. They take a whole small bay or inlet and start netting from the sea, moving steadily inwards towards the shore. And the man in the middle is the most important as he controls the movements of the others. The boys at each end keep the net stretched out with a bamboo pole. The lower edge of the net must be kept down and held taut along the bottom to prevent the fish escaping underneath. By now the sun is really blistering down and reflecting off the water. This is really hard work, and even the Malay boys are sweating. To shoot the nets like this takes about half an hour, and if you're lucky you may get as much as 100 pounds or so of fish, though quite often only a few little ones. A fairly good catch and a rich variety of fish. There are coalfish, coalfish, wrasse, flatfish, bass, eels, catfish, parrotfish, all kinds of all colours: purple, red, magenta, green, yellow, violet, orange, mauve, cerulean and azure. But first, last, and all the time, these Malay people are concerned with looking after their precious nets. The seine net is carefully folded up to be brought in, and nets like this may cost many pounds, and no one in St. Toubon can afford to have a net damaged unnecessarily. It's not unusual for a fishing team to spend 2 or 3 days fishing and then 2 or 3 days going over the nets before they go out fishing again. There are always jobs of repairing and putting new weights onto the cast net. As well as simple wear and tear and rocks and snags, far and away the worst enemies of nets are the sharks. And in the bay there are a great many of them, some of them very big ones. So the Malays wage war on the sharks mercilessly. For bait, a parrotfish firmly secured on the largest hook. And it has to be an extra strong hook because the sharks can break any ordinary tackle at all. The float is an empty oil drum plus a coconut, and with the baited hook attached, it's put well out to sea, and from the shore a watch is kept. There's a shark, and you can't leave a shark on the hook for long. First thing to do is to bring it alongside, and that'll probably need, if it's a big one, 3 or 4 men pulling as hard as they can. It's a tiger shark, the most dangerous kind of all, and so it's got to be treated with the utmost respect. They'll never get it on board unless someone secures the tail with a rope. It's the tiger-like markings on the side which give it its name. And this is the beast which the Malays fear above all others. In fact, it's about the only thing that they are afraid of. The hammer-headed shark is not to be feared. It's a much duller fellow, and even this one, which was 30 inches across that hammerhead, almost a world record, wouldn't harm anyone. One purpose for catching sharks is simply to rid the seas of them. The main carcass itself isn't worth much. In fact, it's the cheapest kind of fish and goes merely for a few pence a pound. But certain parts of the shark, the tail and the fins, are of very high value, in fact second in value only to edible birds' nests. These fins are dried carefully in the sun by the Malay fishermen themselves and then sold for as much as 10 shillings a pound to the Chinese to make soup, shark's fin soup. The enormous gape of the mouth is fringed with cruel triangular teeth which will tear through a human leg in a second. In contrast, the hammerhead shark feeds along the bottom, snuffling with its extraordinary sort of snout and dredging in mostly stingrays and smaller fish into its big mouth. Now the sun is beginning to set. It's late afternoon, and all the fishermen who've been out during the day are beginning to come home. The line fishermen bring in their catch of stingray. shark fishermen weigh their catch, all of 1,000 pounds. It's the Chinese who buy most of the fish at the mouth of the Sarawak River. The crabbers come home from the creeks, and the crabs too are sold to the Chinese, still handcuffed and neatly tied up in their bundles. In the evening there's always a sea breeze to help the boats in past the Crocodile Rock in the mouth of the river. Sails are not treated with quite the same respect as the nets. They're easier to make anyway. Even the wife of the Chinese fish merchant is a fair match for the Malay fisherman. But it's all done very amiably. These two races have been living together for so long. While the more businesslike members of the fishing party go and sell the fish, all the others are at once concerned as ever with putting out the nets to clean and dry. Almost as conspicuous as the village of St. Tubong itself, and running all along the beach in front of it, are a whole line of platforms and scaffoldings, some of them higher than the houses, and the only purpose of these is to serve as frames and racks and hangers on which to clean and dry the many and various forms of fishing net. And the first thing for most of the people when they get home in the evening is to put the nets out for the night on these. As the fishermen of the day come back, the fishermen of the night go out. And perhaps as much as half of the whole of St. Tubong village will be out fishing from sunset right through until dawn. It just depends how they feel, how the fish are running, and which of their many ingenious ways of fishing they choose to use. I often think that temperamentally the people of St. Tubong love fishing so much that sometimes they almost seem to forget it has any purpose other than being wiser than the fish.